Our task 1 is about drug patent ineffectiveness. I'm Callie.
I'm Kaz.
Natalia.
My name is Aton.
And I'm Alexander.
Developing new drugs is very important for the future of our society because it helps us combat newer and harsher illnesses and sicknesses and issues. But creating new drugs is a very complicated process, as shown by this picture from the 2013 PHRMA Pharmaceutical Industry Industrial Profile. So first, development itself and discovery of new compounds is very complicated. But out of 5,000 to 10,000 compounds, only one actually makes it through the full FDA approval cycle, because they have to go through many clinical trials, which usually lasts about 10 to 15 years. And then even when you have an approved medication, it needs to go through continual, ongoing, indefinite research and monitoring.
And not only is the process very time-consuming, it is also very, very expensive. As you can see from this figure here from the Nature Reviews magazine, since 1990, especially, costs of developing drugs have skyrocketed, with an average of $4 billion having to go, with it costing an average of $4 billion for one new drug on the market. And as this figure shows, it has been increasing specifically since 1990 and is estimated to continue to increase as the years go by.
And this, in the pharmaceutical industry, is why patents are very necessary, or are seen as such by some. Patents are required to form a legal monopoly, and this allows businesses and drug developers to recoup their investment and to make a profit, thus incentivizing innovation in theory.
So usually in the pharmaceutical industry in the US, a patent lasts about 20 years, about 17 in practice after the whole approval process ends.
And another tactic used by pharmaceutical industries to extend their patents is to actually have minor alterations that don't actually affect the drug itself. So for example, if it's in a type of pill, they'll change the coating on the pill, which technically is a change, and that extends the duration of the patent usually by 4 or 5 years because there's such a backlog of these changes and things like that.
The patent system is one that is used internationally. Most countries and continents have the same system as the US, where patents last 20 years, except for in Europe, where patents last about 15 years. So the patent system is very accepted and used internationally.
So some problems with the current system is since companies that have patents are allowed to create a monopoly, they can charge whatever exorbitant amounts for these drugs. So consumer stocks in the US specifically are actually 40% higher than the average cost of drugs in Canada, which is the second largest industrialized country in the world. So it's 40%, they're 40% more expensive here than Canada and much more expensive than the rest of the world, and this has actually steadily been increasing over 5 years. So just from 2015 to 2016, the price of drugs on average increased 12%, and that is something that we've been seeing since early 2000s, and it's again scheduled to go on, estimated to go on for the years to come.
And not only is that those rising costs bad for the consumer, they're bad for society as a whole due to the creation of a economic concept called a deadweight loss, in which the increased prices are above the equilibrium that the society desires and can support, and thus the money flows in society are not as efficiently directed.
Another problem with the patent system is that it awards sudden novelty. But the current research for many illnesses such as Alzheimer's focuses more on problems like building on previous research as opposed to a sudden solution to a problem. So, but these sort of non-novel drugs aren't patentable, so the research isn't focused on them because it isn't profitable for the company to work on. So a lot of drugs such as Ditropan, Norvasc, one of these is a hypertension drug, which was very important in the market, but wasn't allowed to have a patent because it wasn't considered novel enough. So companies don't focus on many necessary drugs because they aren't patentable, even though the consumers do need them.
And another problem with patenting quote-unquote novel ideas is that many ideas are actually previously mentioned in research journals or in experience from other people, and under the current patent system, specifically for the pharmaceutical industry, if they are mentioned in Other scenarios, like I said before, research journals or papers and things like that, they're not considered novels. So lots of drugs that were just in the beginning stages mentioned in journals are actually not allowed to be patented, and so they are not developed and not worked on, and they could have immense benefits for society.
So our research question was, how should the drug patent system be augmented to benefit the American people? One solution that our group thought of was to reduce the FDA involvement in order to decrease drug development costs.
And by decreasing drug development costs, it would also foster more innovation, since drugs are less expensive. And people will spend more time in developing different kinds of drugs and more drugs.
And this has the added benefit of removing the need for the patent system entirely, as a lower cost to enter the drug market removes the restriction on drug innovators. This allows us to dispense with the idea that a drug innovation requires a monopoly, which removes the deadweight loss and increases the efficiency of society.
It also eliminates the need for market exclusivity in patents, and so this would actually make it easier for consumers because it would definitely decrease prices, as shown by patent cliffs in which generic drugs were made 80 to 85% cheaper than the previously market exclusive drugs.
So the main issues with reducing FDA involvement mostly have to do with safety. The FDA doesn't exist for no reason. It's a very important part of our current government because what the FDA does is provides a safety net between the American consumer and the pharmaceutical companies, which don't always have the consumer's best interest at heart. Two of the major examples of drugs causing major health issues were thalidomide in 1962, which across Europe caused thousands of birth defects, as shown here, which was mostly prevented by the FDA. While they did not allow the drugs in, some very aggressive pharmaceutical companies did sell them to doctors overseas, and they were unfortunately distributed, but there's no research into that because it was all done under the table. But if the FDA had had more power, it would have been able to prevent even more of this. Another disaster was sulfanilamide, which was a chemical compound which killed 107 children, well, mostly children, in different parts of the US because of a factory mistake. And these were the two events that mostly caused the FDA to get more and more control and power, because after thalidomide prevented a lot of these defects, the public supported them, and they've kind of been becoming more preventative than reactionary, which has led to a sort of escalation, which is what we see now with these patent laws that don't necessarily make as much sense as they used to. So it could make sense to reduce it a bit, but for the most part, the limitations in place by the FDA are there to protect people, and removing them would cause untold casualties.
So the second solution that we thought of was to give federal reimbursement for
For the research and development costs, as
Yeah.
opposed to giving market exclusivity.
So what this allows, what this entails is the government footing the costs of innovation itself and reimbursing companies that do this innovation in order to allow them to recoup their investment. Now, this allows, one, generics to be sold cheaper, which is beneficial for the American consumer economy, and two, it would allow us to remove the patent system altogether, removing the deadweight losses and inefficiency involved.
And by lowering costs, that would encourage competition between various drug companies, which in turn would lower consumer costs because they would be able to basically choose whichever drug is cheaper, and that would, that's like the gears behind capitalism. So it would lower consumer costs, which is a huge problem under the current system, as some drugs are exorbitantly priced, and then people in lower class neighborhoods and lower class jobs aren't able to afford the drugs they need.
And it also solves the problem of the novelty clause in the patent system right now, because it would it wouldn't only just reward the sudden solutions that the patent system does through market exclusivity, but would rather support general improvements in medicine, which is what society needs.
We actually came up with this solution because it sort of exists in the farming industry, where the farmers aren't able to make enough money because per the crop they grow, they actually can't make enough money. So the government heavily subsidizes a lot of these with billions and billions of dollars. So it's not unprecedented, and it could work. It has been proven to work.
So the limitations of this solution do exist, mainly in the form of increased taxes for all, but these are not particularly severe, considering that the costs of innovation are currently being borne by the people who acquire drugs and the few who are not able to buy the drugs that they need to survive due to the costs. Instead, the costs of innovation are redistributed upon the taxpayer instead of those who cannot avoid them.
And another limitation of the second solution is it would increase government involvement, which could potentially increase bureaucratic overhead since it is through government reimbursement. But again, we believe that there will be a net gain for the American public since drugs will be cheaper and more easily accessible.
Just to clarify, when he says bureaucratic overhead, he means there would have to be another branch or part of the government that would create jobs that would have to be paid for also by the people. Like there would have to be more departments to deal with it. It would cause more work.
So as was concluded before, the limitations of Solution 2 are not very severe because it's being spread out over the whole population. And at some point, everybody's going to need drugs, so it's sort of spread out over time as opposed to the one moment when you need to buy this one drug and can't afford it. Yeah, and it also solves the problems of the current system.
So again, the main problem with the current system was the market exclusivity laws, which allowed companies to charge whatever prices they want and stopped other companies from creating cheaper drugs and therefore lowering costs for consumers. But through our plan of federal reimbursement, this eliminates market exclusivity laws, which would encourage competition between drug companies, and it will also lower the cost for the consumer.
Great, and next slide. And these are our figure credits. That's it.
All right, good job. 12 minutes and 45 seconds.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
Yeah, so was I.
Okay, ready? Callie, can you describe how the content of your team presentation was changed as a result of the group discussion?
So we discussed a lot and had a lot of debates about our solutions, and after some debating and thinking of different points of view, we came to our second solution, which fits our question most appropriately.
Natalia, how did the group decide to include Vikas' perspective or conclusions into the overall presentation?
Vikas had a sort of ethical perspective, so he looked at how prices affect consumers, especially it's because high prices from drugs result in consumers can't pay for their medications. So because of that, we started thinking more about coming up with different solutions. And so one idea was also with the FDA regulations, so because ethically that doesn't, but it's against consumers overall, so that solution wouldn't work. And also because my perspective was more corporate, and as were some of the others. So his perspective showed that the limitations of the current patent system, such especially with the market exclusivity effects on high prices, especially.
All right. Alexander, can you give one specific way that your thinking has changed as a result of learning about Eitan's findings?
So initially, I was more supportive of Solution 1 than I was of Solution 2, as I had assumed that the best way to help the economic situation of the country was to remove the thing that was causing the problems, that being the FDA. But Eitan's research on the history and value of the FDA really made me rethink that, and it made me consider that removing the FDA would be a lot more harmful than the good it causes.
Okay. Eitan, in what way did you improve your ability to work with a group as a result of this project?
So before this project, most of the time I did a group project. We would kind of do our own thing and then kind of mish it all together and do a presentation. But with this group, what we did was a lot of debate, and there was a lot of exchanging of ideas involved, where we would all read each other's papers, consider the concepts, and then having learned more about the subject as a whole, be able to bring new ideas to the table, which is how we came up with the solutions. It involved a lot of research that wasn't even related to drugs, such as the farming research for the subsidization. It was very educational in terms of incorporating other people's ideas and opinions.
Okay. Vikas, can you describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports that made you think differently about your team's conclusion?
Yes. So along the same lines as Alexander, initially I believed that it would be beneficial to simply remove the FDA, since I was looking at it from a more ethical perspective, and having the FDA with all the regulations was forcing corporations to actually turn away a lot of drugs that would have been helpful to the American public because they weren't patentable and because they wouldn't be profitable, because, like we said before, each drug costs around $4 billion to create. So I thought if we removed the FDA, that would lower costs, it'd be easier for consumers to access these drugs. And it wasn't until Aton presented his research, basically the reason the FDA is there to prevent such disasters as what happened back in the 60s and the 30s. And until he presented that side of the argument as basically the reason to the FDA, that it actually was also an ethical point of view. The FDA there was there to make sure that the American public was safe, and I was actually thinking that the FDA was harming the American public. So through his research, I was able to get a more rounded perspective on our topic, and that's, really the reason we decided on solution 2 rather than solution 1.
Right. Nice job, guys.